For the last 5 years, all of us at Eleanor Roosevelt College have been in a remarkable partnership with campus colleagues as we planned, designed, built, furnished, landscaped, cleaned, and now inhabited this new facility for our students. It's located just immediately west of this IRPS complex and encompasses 11.5 acres. Building this new Eleanor Roosevelt complex has been the largest and most complex design and construction project here at UCSD. There's no such project, nothing as complicated as this has been, that could be achieved without a series of very strong partnerships and scores of very hardworking people to make it possible. In this case, the very strong partnerships and our collaborators have been, jointly with the college, have been facilities design and construction here at UCSD, housing and dining services, our architects, Moshe Safdie Associates, Boston, and as in construction, Rudolph and Sletten as our contractors. In this partnership, the college staff has been responsible for representing the mission and the administration of UCSD's 6 undergraduate colleges and what we are established to achieve. Larry Barrett, who fortunately is here tonight, and his successor, Mark Cunningham, and their team in Housing and Dining Services held up their high standards for maintenance and fiduciary responsibility for the living spaces and the dining commons for our students here on campus. Boone Hellman, Mark Nelson, and many others in facilities design and construction provided the construction management expertise, and Rudolph and Sletten guided the contractors and equipment toward a noisy completion. Our creative design partner throughout all of this has been Moshe Safdie, who, as the executive architect of the project, has led Moshe Safdie Associates and locally the Safdie Rabinus Architects firm as our design team. From years at Harvard, where he was Ian Worcester Professor of Architecture and Urban Design and served as director of the Urban Design Program, Moshe had acquired with the Harvard houses, or had been acquainted with the Harvard houses, which are analogous in many ways to the colleges here at UCSD. So from the beginning, he valued the role of the colleges in the undergraduate experience here on campus. He respected our responsibility to help construct a sense of community and belonging in the university, and he also applauded the international orientation of the college. He understood from the beginning that the design of the campus would need to reinforce our particular mission as a college. As the architect of multifamily housing units and planned communities, such as Habitat 67 in Montreal and Mamila in Israel, he had experience creating distinguished living spaces in which residents could feel that their units were each slightly different from their neighbors. His designs for public libraries in Vancouver and Salt Lake City, museums and galleries in Kansas City, Ottawa, at Yad Vashem, all showcased the contents of these museums, but they also created spaces that promote planned and informal interaction. Finally, his designs for the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles and Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, like all of his projects, capitalized on the features of the site and created important interplays of light and shadow, interior and exterior spaces. In each case, his projects experimented with new materials and played with innovative design solutions to design challenges. We knew all of this when we selected him to be the executive architect for the college. And as the executive architect, the selection committee looked for a distinctive addition to the UCSD campus. Let me assure you that we have not been disappointed. We are very pleased that Mr. Safdie has agreed to speak this afternoon on the architecture of interaction. Moshe.
Thank you, Anne. It's a great pleasure to be here today at many levels. First, of course, the inauguration of the Eleanor Roosevelt College, in which, as an architect, you see a project coming to life, being taken over. I think there's no greater joy for an architect than seeing the project become its own place. Painful cutting the umbilical cord, but it's got to happen sooner or later. Also because it's been a very special collaboration for me, first collaboration with my daughter Tal and with my son-in-law Ricardo Rabines, and also because I think it's the first time I'm giving a lecture attended by my two grandsons who promised not to heckle. I want to talk about the architecture of interaction because I think it is the central theme, as Anne told us, of what a college is all about. But I want to expand that into the greatest issue of interaction both in cities and buildings. And I think it is important at the outset to establish the connectivity between urbanism and architecture, because urbanism is a result of the assemblage of individual works of architecture. They are, so to speak, the building block. Without the building block, there is no urbanism. And we, as architects and as urbanists, ponder the design of the individual parts and the whole. And we're always torn between, does the whole become greater than the parts? And the question of interaction occurs at each and every one of these scales, the scale of city, the scale of neighborhood, the scale of college, and then of individual buildings. I think if we go back to the history of cities, you could sort of make the general statement that cities are all about interaction, and they came to be as a place of interaction, and that the form and shape of cities historically has been centered about the idea of how to create these places in which people come and do business together, develop a culture together. In other words, the meaning of civilization. And particularly Greek and Roman cities, but all ancient cities, had a structure where these places were very clear and articulated. In the Greek and Roman cities, we have the Cardo Maximus, the central street, in which all the main public buildings plugged in and sort of created public life. They were usually colonnaded. There was the Agora as a place of assemblage, and these forms evolved over centuries in the form of European piazzas, Asian city squares, gallerias in the 19th centuries that connected streets and created weather protection, and so on and so forth. And so that you could say that the history of urbanism is the evolving urban form of the places of interaction. Even the 18th and 19th century cities that became very large, like Paris or Vienna, the Ring in Vienna, or the boulevards in Paris, were basically conceiving the place of interaction and then allowing individual buildings, the individual pieces of architecture, to define and create that place. And you cannot think of the boulevards of Paris without the anonymous building blocks that actually form those boulevards, and so it goes in terms of the relationship between the two. Now, this is somewhat true also of individual buildings, and I'll come to talk later about specific building types like libraries or museums or courthouses or places of governance. But in each of these building types, you see evolving the concept of how the public interacts with each other within them. If you think of the Paris Opera House, it is a place of ritual. The experience of coming to see a performance had to do with the whole procession from the moment you got off to the carriage, ascending the grand stairs, the great rooms of interaction, and then also the performance, of course. And certainly when you think about the history of universities, it is all about defining such places within the university. And the quadrangles, and certainly one thinks of the great examples of Cambridge and Oxford, are places where you've got the programmed spaces, which are the individual houses and places of teaching, and then within that you've got the unprogrammed spaces where life of the university carried on. And again, one thinks of this as the kind of architecture being assembled to create greater and greater scale of opportunities. Now, all is not well in this kind of brief history of interaction of people in architecture. And I think that it is fair to say that in the past 100 years, a lot of these structures that had evolved over time and were in place, and we relied on them, and they didn't need to be reinvented, have been in whole or in part destroyed. And I guess I would go, first of all, to the fact that we are an automobile society. And as an automobile society, much of the fabric of cities, streets as places of assembly, related to the pedestrian scale and so on, is a thing of the past. It's certainly a thing of the past in those cities that evolved in the automobile era. We don't need to go too far to find some of those. And in fact, we are now searching for the new invention or the substitution of how we might create places of interaction in a city that has changed in scale, where the automobile, both in terms of its parking space requirements and the extraordinary infrastructure it demands, has become a divisive and distancing element in urbanism. But there are other developments, the change in scale, the fact that almost every building type that we can think of has become 10 or 20 or 30 times the size of what had been traditionally, whether it's the footprint of an office building, whether we think of a hospital of many thousand beds, or whether we think of a university with 50 or 60, or as I've seen in China now, campuses planned for 150,000 students. And how does one create a sense of place and scale and so on as this scale changes? And then there is elevator buildings, which are very unfriendly places by definition. I remember when we were commissioned to design the super collider in Texas, where the great tunnel, 54 miles in diameter, would be the place where the particle physics would be explored, that there were two models we had been asked to visit. There would be, of course, at the super collider something like 3,000 to 4,000 physicists and engineers, and the question was, how does one create a campus for it? And I remember being asked to go to the Fermilab outside Chicago and to the complex outside Geneva. One sort of evolved over time, village-like, and was low-rise in scale and had cafes studied and little alleys that connected the different lab buildings. Actually looked like a converted military camp, but it was full of life and intensity, and you could see, you know, people moving all over the place. And then in Chicago, the entire complex was put into a high-rise building. Robert Wilson, who had created Fermilab, believed that by putting everybody in one tower, one would get interaction. But it turned out that going up and down in the elevator is not a great place to have an exchange. And one of the conclusions that we reached when we came to do the super collider, which, since many of you know, has been put to sleep by Congress, but nevertheless had evolved into paper and plans at least, is that we will not do anything higher than 4 floors, because in the prairies of Texas, land was available to make a horizontal place, which would be a friendlier place. And so this, of course, brings us to the mall. Who says we don't have places of interaction? What about the malls? Actually, I heard a very nice compliment today, or received a compliment, which I'll quote. I was talking to a journalist in Salt Lake City, where we just opened the library, and she was interviewing young people coming into the library, and a 14-year-old boy said, "Who needs the mall when we have this library?" So. But a central premise in our work has been to explore how do you, I guess I would use the word craft, how do you craft places where people feel good relating to each other. What does it take in terms of the activities and the uses? What are the issues of scale, of light? Each of these nuances could put off the whole kind of mysterious chemistry of what makes these places work and sometimes not work. And so I thought I would today take you through a little tour of projects in which this has been a central concern, talking about some of the places where we feel it worked and other places where it might have worked less. So let's just go through, a bit of history. The urban piazza, probably St. Mark's, is as well known as any European piazza. The very delicate bringing together of worship, of government, of commerce, of residences, and then evolving in the 19th century, the gallerias of Europe, many of them, some destroyed, in which the idea of protecting from the weather and creating places where people would go from one part of the city evolved. And every culture had its own iteration. The bazaars of the Middle East, feeding into courtyards, or the madrasas, the schools, and the mosques as kind of extensions of the bazaar. Or again, an example in Barcelona, along the Ramblas, where a great city square becomes a place of assembly. And this sense of urban place is something that we search for today. And these are two contemporary examples, both commercial projects by the Rouse Company, Faneuil Hall Marketplace in Boston, and the Inner Harbor in Baltimore, as places that, through the auspices of retail, but also trying to bring in other urban uses so that it begins to transcend the mall, you create places where people again come together in the city and interact. And both projects have been remarkably successful, which I think tells us something about the thirst that there is in the public for such places. I want to go back to Habitat, mentioned by Anne, because it was maybe the first place in which I explored the notion of community and privacy. The individual house as a place where you have the qualities of the single-family dwelling, its garden on the roof of the unit below, it's being open in 4 directions, the sense of access along the streets, as you can see, the circulation pattern. And it's interesting to look at these slides 35 years later, which show the patina of life, the modifications people have made, the planting that sort of fills in, and most important from my point of view, the very strong sense of community that the residents in Habitat have evolved, including this being the longest residency building in Canada in terms of people just sticking around. And so one can say the sense of the balance between community and privacy has been a very central theme that will recur. The first major museum that we worked on was the National Gallery of Canada, which you can see was located very strategically adjacent to Parliament, the Museum of Civilization, across the Ottawa River. And here was a national museum, certainly a place of ritual, but also a place of art. And the theme here was, for us, how to create an inviting, extrovert building, a building that felt open, as you can see, very transparent to the city. But the evolution of this, I think, was significant, because we went back and looked at the prototype of the traditional museum. This is Schinkel's Museum in Berlin, 19th century, in which you see the rotunda, like maybe the National Gallery in Washington, very similar, a rotunda at the center of the building, at the heart of the building, galleries surrounding the public space, and basically blank walls or windows which ended up being blocked because galleries don't work very well with windows, so that the sense of the 19th century museum is an introvert building. It's mysterious. Its public life is internal. It is an elitist place. It is not a place to be open to the public at large. Never wasn't intended to be truly a public place. And in contrast, the National Gallery plan, and you see here the axonometric of the plan, inverts the museum. It puts the public spaces at the perimeter. It places the galleries within the public spaces. In other words, it says these public spaces could be transparent, could be open to the city. They are inviting. They kind of protect the collection of art within it, and so this kind of inverted plan leads to a sequence of spaces which is very different to the traditional museum. And I realized as we worked on it, designed it, built it, and now it's been out there for about almost 20 years, that some of those strategies actually worked. For example, the sense that though you enter the building without ascending any steps, amphitheater-like spaces in front of it become places of activity, and it often is active. And that then there is a sense of processional, a kind of a ritual, so that there is this kind of division between daily life in the city and the experience of the collection within, and so you ascend to the Great Hall. And then the Great Hall becomes a kind of an urban room. It is shaded as the sun comes out. It can be modified acoustically by bringing out these banners when there's a concert. And that space is not only conceived as the hall or foyer of the museum, but it really becomes a place of continuous activity. Concerts, receptions, all the heads of state dinners that occur in Ottawa now occur in that building, to the point where it's become even a conflict between the museum and the Prime Minister's office, because it has been kind of embraced by, in fact, a book has just come out criticizing that my architecture is excessively monumental and sacral, if I got it right. Proof the politicians took the building over. And within that are the kind of quiet oases where you come, within the galleries for contemplation, for rest, for orientation. And then, just in case you think this museum has no galleries, it has galleries as well. Not far from Ottawa City Hall, from the National Gallery, is Ottawa City Hall. The old City Hall is this 1950s building, which is a kind of a monument to early modernism, designed by Rother, Bland, and Trudeau, and we were to triple the size of this. And again, it was a very interesting competition, because all the other four competitors had proposed 12-story and 15-story towers next to the 7-story tower, and sort of bridged between them and ended up with two high-rise buildings. But we had the notion that a city hall for a city of 500,000 people, very much like maybe San Diego in scale, is a place of community, and you're not going to achieve that by having a tower. Rather, we created an entry pavilion, created a community street where all the departments that access the public are accessed from, with culminating in the council chamber with the other city departments along a series of courtyards, and all of that opening to a great lawn, south-facing lawn, and this is the Rideau River coming around into a great waterfall into the Ottawa River. And this was again a delicate issue of the identity of city government within a federal city, the national capital, but the city government being within it. And so the roofs of the city council chamber and the entry pavilion create a kind of a skyline, and then within the building, this community street, which opens to the lawn, has access to all the various departments, and the council chamber itself is drenched with daylight, a very kind of informal place of community without the kind of pomposity of so many city council chambers. Some years later, we began working on the Vancouver Public Library. And Vancouver itself is a very exciting city with a great deal of vitality in its downtown, very multicultural at this point in its history. But I want to go back to the role of client and how central that is in the kind of dialogue that architect has with client, because the program book for the Vancouver Library said that they did not want just a library, but they wanted to create an urban place. They wanted that library, which, just to put you in context, this is the downtown, And the library is just a little back from downtown, and the idea was that the library would vitalize this entire district. And the program spoke about creating a place which is open from early in the morning till late at night, even when the library was not open to the public. We also had the difficult mission of integrating an office building for the federal government, since they happen to own the land. And what you see right there is the integration of that office building. So what evolved is, again, a term I've used before, we created an urban room. We, in some ways, inverted the library plan. We created the central block, within which you had the stacks and all the services, contained by a reading gallery, and then contained by an urban wall, which contained this room and series of piazzas. And you could enter the building from any direction and into the urban room, from which you cross the bridge into the library control zone. And so the building became a combination of the reading galleries, which you see on the left, surrounding the block of stacks in the center. And as you came into the urban room, like a menu, you would see all the departments. Everything that's accessible in the library became clear. So you sort of get drawn into the building. And it's interesting that as we were designing the library, we came to design also the Ford Center for the Performing Arts. But all the empty properties which you see around in this photograph have now been filled with with a hotel here, apartment complex here, a hotel there. In other words, the library has already played its role as a catalyst for the district. And here, the urban room, the transparency into the various library departments, lined with shops, cafes, bookshops, etc. And early in the morning, this room fills up, people waiting just by the bridge, and as the library opens at 9 o'clock, they all stream in, all to grab their favorite seat within the library. The reading galleries, as seen from the stacks across, and always looking out to the view of the city and being visible from the city. And activities just emerge in those spaces, both in the outdoor piazzas and in the library itself. The Mamilla district in Jerusalem has been a much more complex district plan. You can see that it is this whole area outside the walled city of Jerusalem. It was a no man's land until 1967. We developed this master plan concept in the early 70s, including the notion of a pedestrian street that connects the bazaars of the old city and the new city, a valley park, residences, hotel, shops, a major bus terminal and parking to serve the old city and the complex, all of which were integrated into the landscape and maintained the scale of the surrounding city. And it's been a long process of construction, development, debate. Won't go into it in detail, but you see here in part the residences as seen from the city walls, with the King David Hotel in the background, our own Citadel Hotel, which is part of the complex that opened some years ago. But most significantly, and yet to be totally realized, currently under construction, are the pedestrian paths that connect the parts of the city, which are not a mall, but really pedestrian streets, integrating some of the older buildings and new construction, and basically bringing in retail and cultural facilities and some institutions to create this fine mixture of what can make a vital urban place. And then, of course, getting into the big debate, we had 9 cinemas. I thought that was a wonderful achievement of the religious factions in the city, saying this was sacrilege and blocking the project for 4 years as they fought the presence of cinemas. So San Diego seems simple when you next to this is the Hebrew Union College, and I think that's relevant in terms of the evolution of ideas about places of education, because the college in Jerusalem, this is ironically an American college in Jerusalem, was an opportunity to think through the notion of place for education. And the plan is a series of courtyards, one and a second one and a third one and yet a fourth one, interconnecting to each other the academic courtyard, the residential courtyard. As you can see them spilling into each other, all connected by a series of walks at the lower level, but also by a skywalk which actually comes all across the top of the buildings, all the way to its lookout towards the old city, so that you've got two levels of circulation surrounding a series of courtyards. And I think, again, I come back to program. The program spoke about the various number of classrooms, residences, and so on that were required, but it did not speak about the relationship of the indoor and outdoor life of the place. Programs generally don't. It also didn't speak about the role of landscape and architecture, and here really was an opportunity in a climate very much like San Diego to truly integrate landscape and architecture, which, by the way, I should assure you, is they're pretty small trees out there, but they will grow. But you see that the unprogrammed spaces, the courtyards, are where much of the life of the college occur. Anywhere from a commencement to a concert, they just become this sort of outdoor living rooms. And in a climate such as this really takes on its own dimension. And many of the lessons of Hebrew Union College came to the skirball as we came to consider in the context of California and Los Angeles, not a university, not a place of education, but a cultural center that again has its own network of outdoor and indoor spaces, very much interweaving and very much being the center of many, many of the activities within that place. Which brings me back to Salt Lake, which is one of the more recent experiences in terms of this whole issue of interaction in an urban place. And I sort of want to backtrack and go to the sort of memory of libraries. These are the two great libraries in Paris by Labrousse, the Bibliothèque Nationale and the Sainte-Geneviève. And I think these are wonderful prototypes of the great 19th century libraries. The great reading rooms surrounded by books, lots of daylight because now metal construction has evolved. And these probably go back to more ancient memories. These are fantasies of libraries, illustrating Borges' book on his fantasy of a library, also having this extraordinary sense of going back to the origin of the notion of library, Library of Alexandria, the library in Ephesus, the storehouse of culture and knowledge, and the place of scholars and so on, and then bringing us all the way to the 21st century in terms of the library that serves the entire population of a city, including everyone, including the homeless, including those who are formally or informally dressed, a library for everyone. And here you see the existing library, the courthouse that was demolished to make place for the new library, City Hall, and here you see again City Hall and the library now already realized, so it gives you the context of its setting. It's in the heart of downtown, but unlike Vancouver, which is a hustle bustle of a downtown, which has mass transit, light rail, you name it, you could say that downtown Salt Lake is crowded, neither daytime nor nighttime. And the objective was, could the library become a catalyst for creating a place for people to come back into the downtown again? And I go back to one of the early diagrams of the building in which we showed, this is the existing library, a building entered at the corner facing the downtown, forming a great piazza, a wall that descends and surrounds both the library and that piazza, but to give that wall more meaning, not only is it lined from one end to the other with shops, cinemas, cafes, etc., but it's a climbable wall so that you can actually ascend it and come all the way to the roof, which is a great park, reading garden that faces the Wabash Mountains all around, and forming a network of spaces, the roof garden, the piazza, and the urban room within, as the kind of public spaces within which the library proper functions. And people said, walking up a wall, what does that mean, and what would it feel like? And so I pulled out one of the slides I took in China in '73, and suggested that if the Chinese could climb the wall, we could do the same. Actually, it's being used all the time now. And to explain this in plan, here's that wall that surrounds the block. The blocks in Salt Lake City are 600 feet square, the largest in the country. as are the streets, wide enough for the coach to make a U-turn. You'd think that by now, given that we are back to cars or into cars, there could be some treed medians in the center of these very wide streets, but that is yet a battle to be won. But here we extended the program. Not only is there an auditorium, but we proposed adding art cinemas to attract younger people and adults and at different times, larger shops, a large park, and many new community uses in the existing library. And that mix of quasi-commercial, quasi-cultural, quasi-entertainment, and the library itself seems to really be at work. A view of the library with the auditorium as you come from the east, and again as you look down on it from the university, there's the climbable wall, the crescent wall, and the roof garden and city hall. The entry from the downtown, and the urban room extending outwards towards the piazza, the upper levels being the reading galleries where people can cross the bridge, come with their books, and be more secluded, and other places within the main footprint of the library where they are closer to the various services. You see here the bridges crossing over to the reading gallery, and the public spaces extending right through. But this project has gone much further than Vancouver because the reading galleries and the library block are open to the urban room. They're not separated by glazing as they were in Vancouver. The library team in Salt Lake bought into the idea that a library is a big community place, and if there is some sound level or some interaction between people that is not the kind of very solemn and quiet library atmosphere, so be it. And it's been very interesting to see how the public responds to this. Also, the circulation, where people ascend and descend in the building, is very visible. As you can see, the stair flying into the space, the elevators being glazed, all the movement and action in the building are visible, and that makes people become much more aware of the activity that's going on in the building. And again, this building has only been open for about 4 months, but I'm told that every night there is some event, community event in the building. Sometimes a banquet, a dinner, lectures, celebrations, music, and all that brings the community of the library, let's call it the community of readers, and the public at large into contact with each other. This is the actual opening events in which every level of the building was densely inhabited. We even ended up using the spiral stair as a speaker platform. And the balance between community and privacy. The privacy of the reading tables facing the city and community on the other side. There is also this place that we call the lens. We like nicknaming different parts of the buildings, which was an attempt to create an enormous glass wall that looked to the mountains in spite of the fact that in this desert climate it faced south. And you can see that the lens is made up of two glazed areas with a space in between them. The bottom, by the way, is a children's library, which is shaded by these extendable shades. And as the heat builds up in that cavity, it is exhausted at summer, and it is trapped and circulated into the building at winter, thereby using the energy. And so we are able to have this totally glass, transparent, clear glass, not tinted glass, wall facing south, which becomes completely transparent at night, and yet it is a completely sustainable and feasible technical device in terms of responsibility towards energy conservation. And you can also see the children's library extending outwards into this amphitheater and sunken gardens, so that the presence of children in the building is really celebrated and makes it always alive. In design and not yet in construction is a performing arts center for Kansas City. A concert hall, an opera house, and a theater sitting on a large city block which connects the downtown back there, and the Crown Center, which is an extension of downtown. And so in many ways, a pivotal project in terms of connecting two parts of the city that right now are cut off by a freeway, which is right behind us. And we decided to have all the public spaces of the complex facing south towards the Crown Center, and to make them totally glazed and transparent. So in a sense, we are placing these buildings side by side and then creating a large sheltered space in front of them. The parking is terraced into the park in front, and people are ascending into the complex. And whatever is going on in the building, whatever performances and other events going in the building, being absolutely on the escarpment, visible from anywhere in the city towards the south, and a very dramatic view from what is generally the back of the theater, the stage tower, as seen from the north. The cross-section that explains how this series of undulating geometries creates this tensile structure of cables and glass, which enclose with total transparency the public spaces within it, and the series of public spaces as they connect one theater to the other and create the sense of ritual of performing arts that I think, again, is something that people crave for. And just to move in scale, I'd like to say a few words about a city we've been working on for the past, I think it's 12 years, the city of Modiin, which is halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in Israel, a city that was built from scratch. I should emphasize for those who do care that this is on the Israeli side of the Green Line. It is not a settlement. I have not designed or built any settlements, and would refuse to do so if offered. Very hilly land, as much of the land above the coastline is, a series of valleys that go east-west, and ridges that follow the orientation towards the sea. And the question here, doing a new city from scratch, an automobile city, if you will, although it would be well served by a train system and public transit, is can we recreate that sense of street, of urban activity, which has certainly been a quality totally lost in the Israeli new towns built between 1950 and recent years, in which a whole series of new towns followed the British model or the modernist model of Chandigarh, or the British new town model of sector by sector neighborhoods with a self-contained downtown, and one of the sectors a grid of arterial traffic roads that separates each neighborhood, and each neighborhood being conceived as a self-sufficient place. You can see that in the plan of Chandigarh and many other plans. And we went back and suggested that it's actually the plan of Byzantine Jerusalem. This is the Madaba plan of Jerusalem with the Cardo Maximus, which I mentioned earlier, the central street, the spine of the community, plugged by the various public activities, and then surrounded by the walled city. That this kind of spine of community life is something that we could reintroduce in Modiin as something that carries traffic, that still forms an urban place. And it was the valleys that were the key to creating such a place. In other words, each valley would become such a spine, defined by housing that forms its edges, one-way traffic arteries on either sides, most of it being park, schools, shops, community facilities, all within the valley. And as you see, since the series of valleys actually converged at one place, at that one place where all the valleys meet conveniently would be the town center. And abutting to that would be a nature preserve, so that the untouched nature, the town center, and the spines that radiate out become the place of community. Everything else thereafter hardly matters, although we do care. And in the sense that though we did not design a single building in this town, we defined the massing, the parking solution, the essential landscape features in plans that were rather detailed at the scale of 1 to 500 and 1 to 250 metric, which then many developers and many architects interpreted and built for the private sector. All of the city was built by the private sector. And there is no subsidy in it because it is the land proceeds that finance the infrastructure, the land being publicly owned. And so you see here the basic zoning plan with each of these valleys being a spine of its general district. I don't even want to use the word neighborhood because the neighborhoods here overlap and you see them converging into the town center, and here's one of these valleys and the second one and the third one, and each of them being inspired by Beverly Hills, we have to confess. Each of them is with its own species of trees. There's the valley which is the pine trees, the valley of the jacarandas, the valley of the palms, and these are old pictures by now. The trees are getting there, and the identity of each district is very much associated with its also plant life. And it is the shops and the schools and many of the facilities, and then connecting all of these uphill across the topography, against the grain of the topography, and within the topography that forms this grid of community life. Which brings me to the Eleanor Roosevelt College. And I don't have elaborate photographs because I'd rather you go and see it in real life, but I just want to talk about some of our preoccupations and some of our strategies, and I guess in the next few years we will find out how well they have worked. But this is the plan. We are there. Great hall, dining hall. I don't know if my proposal that this be called the Common has been adopted. Is it the Common or is it something else? The Green? Or the Green, okay. In San Diego it should be the Green. And then this needs a name. Ricardo suggested today the Paseo. Does that go? Paseo? Promenade? I don't know. But I want to go back to the master plan, which existed before we were hired. And the master plan proposed for the college a series of quadrangles. If my memory serves me right, there were 5 quadrangles. So each sort of formed a cluster of buildings within which were courtyards. But at the end, it was 5 things, 5 clusters. Very strongly divided by Scholars Drive, in spite of its esteemed name, a big problem, of dividing the site in 2. And then there were neighbors who one had to be concerned with. But my main concern in observing the master plan was that it missed the point that Eleanor Roosevelt College was a place, a community, which wanted to identify itself as a community within the greater community of the campus. And after all, that is the principle of the Harvard houses and the Cambridge houses, and going all the way back to the notion of creating a sense of a community within a community. And that means adopting physical strategies that make that possible. And without going through the whole evolution of many months of studies, a number of strategies emerged as being central to this objective. One is that it cannot be 5 places, it has to be 1 place. Secondly, that you must take the public places, the community places that are defined in the program, the dining hall, the International House Great Hall, the lounges that serve groups of students in different parts of the college, the provost offices and facilities which provide services to the students. You must take those and, just like the ancient plans of every Greek city, plug them into the main public paths of the college. They cannot just be anywhere. They have to sustain and animate the life within the college. And the way to do that is to have them extremely prominent on the path of movement. There's a connection between movement and place of assembly. You cannot dissociate assembly from the spatial and movement systems, circulation systems within the campus. And that led us to conclude that there should be one very large space, a common, a green, of the scale of the spaces of, say, Harvard Yard or across the river, the Harvard Business School Common, which are large enough that they can become ceremonial places of the college, culminating with the dining, and then a more linear space, I might call it more bazaar-like space, which originates at the Provost building and extends all the way to the International House Great Hall, with very clear gateways. One gateway at this corner, a gateway into the college at this point, and accepting that we are an automobile society, also a gateway of the garage, which we worked so hard to integrate into the landscape and lower it and make it as invisible as possible. And it is these spines then crisscrossed by east-west spines, particularly this one which bridges the street. This used to bridge it, but got value engineered is the term. We get more value by eliminating the bridge, but we had to meet budgets. And the third spine, the third path that connects this way, so that in a sense, downhill and uphill, strong connections across the topography, strong, very clear spaces, and then all the lounges are studied. Every one of these buildings has a lounge. This lounge, my nickname is the laundry clubs. Laundry clubs here and there. They really are very club-like. And all this, and classrooms, all this opening into this public domain. And then circulation, that is stairs and elevators and so on, always looking into these spaces. So you sense the movement of people coming in and out of the buildings as you are on the campus. And then going beyond that, trying to give the students the kind of amenities, like each of the residences has a roof garden. The roof gardens look into each other. They're connected by secondary means of stairs, so you can jump from one terrace to the other. And we all fantasize how wonderfully they're going to be used and what outrageous things are going to occur there. So it's time to, I think, conclude. I'd just like to take this back a little bit to relating some of these thoughts to where the profession is today, the profession of architecture. Because it seems to me that this is a period very rich in isms. Postmodernism, deconstructivism, I mean, they just follow each other. And it used to be that they sort of followed the world of fashion in terms of the rhythm. They even accelerate into the point where they change, what's in changes even faster than fashion. And I think it's very important to recognize to what extent these schools, and to call them schools mean that they constitute a well-articulated sensibility and attitude, although it seems to me that by schools in architecture we often mean stylistic recognition of something. But nevertheless, to call them school, they seem to come and go very fast. And yet the values that underlie architecture, the values which are so fundamental to the making of community, or to the kind of issues we talk about when we say we want to make places of public assembly and interaction, or buildings which are introvert or extrovert, these are values which I don't think have a rapidly changing timescale. I think they're values which are relatively constant. And so it seems to me that we need to recognize to what extent architecture has been in the spell of the commercial aspects of our culture. That it is inconceivable that architecture observe the extraordinary value put on fashion, the extraordinary fame and notoriety that is possible for people in the world of entertainment and certainly in the world of fashion to achieve with ideas that are fleeting, that are momentary, that are very superficial. And this very difficult set of values to sustain in terms of the notion of timelessness in a culture that is so revved up. And much of this has to do with an attitude that's true about our culture as a whole, which is a kind of blind faith in the marketplace. You know, we've gone through cycles of planning and faith in planning, and we've come to discredit that. But I think it's fair to say that today the general posture of the culture is to accept that allow things to follow the market will generally yield positive things. And I think certainly when it comes to urbanism and to architecture, this is something to question critically. I love a quote by Octavio Paz, writing in '92, just before he, some years before he died. He said, "The market is blind and deaf. It is not fond of literature. It does not know how to choose. Its censorship is not ideological. It has no ideas. It knows all about prices, but nothing about values." And, you know, in the presence of Khan and the Salk Institute across, it's, I think, appropriate to mention Khan's deep belief in basically the issue of how a building fits its purpose. What he used to like to call, what does the building want to be? How does the building respond to its program? And I think I like to amplify, by program we don't just mean the set of utility requirements of a program, but the life intended in a building. If it's a school, it's how students and faculty interact in the most uplifting way. That is the purpose of a school. And that brings us back to a Darwinian notion of fitness, that architecture is seeking fitness, and to seek fitness is not to have infinite possibilities, as many architects believe is the case today, but very limited possibilities. Very limited possibilities which, when we discover them, when we find them, give us an architecture and urbanism of great beauty. And so it seems to me that this kind of search and the sense of community that we look for is the appropriate value to set forth as we try and reinterpret the meaning of architecture at a time of democracy. Thank you.